Okay, so on behalf of the National University of Management Social Innovation Lab, we're very pleased to welcome Giff Constable to our iLab guest speaker series this evening. So Giff Constable is a product leader, entrepreneur, and author. He was the chief product officer at meetup.com and earlier was the CEO of Neo, a global innovation consulting company acquired by Pivotal. He has sold 3 businesses while at the helm and helped build many others. He's the author of 2 books on how to test new business ideas, which are used as core curriculum at top university entrepreneurship programs and incubators around the world. In addition to his previous startup books, Talking to Humans and Testing with Humans, Giff will have a new book coming out soon called First Principles Product Management. So we're all looking forward to that book. In addition to the business books, he also has a science fiction novel too called Becoming Monday. I haven't yet checked that one out, but I am also very curious to take a look at that. So again, we're very pleased to have Giff Constable as our speaker this evening to share his advice to our student startup teams competing in this year's business model competition Cambodia. So let me pass the screen over to you, Giff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, actually, I've switched gears on the new book. Instead of doing First Principles Product Management, I'm now working on what I've realized is the biggest glass ceiling for people trying to become product executives, whether as engineers or product managers or designers, is financial knowledge and financial savvy. So I'm working on a book to help people understand the finance side of business. But yes, I'm often trying to mentor and help teams figure out how to test their business ideas. How do you know if something is a good idea? This is a question that I've spent a lot of my life trying to solve as an entrepreneur, as a professor, as a product leader. It's a difficult thing to do. And so when I was talking with Stephen going into this, we thought it would be good just to share a few thoughts and then open it up to Q&A. Does that still sound good, Stephen?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, sometimes I do a demo of this, and we certainly can attempt that if that's interesting, or actually we'll do a mock interview with somebody. But let me run through a few thoughts, and I'm going to share my screen. I don't want to drown you with slides, but I'm just going to share my screen just to get a few ideas across. And so, can you see my slides?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. All right. So, the question that we're all trying to ask is how do we increase the odds that our new business or our new product is going to be successful? And successful means a lot of different things, right? It's providing value to our customers. It's creating value for our own business. It's providing value to enough people. There's a lot of different permutations on this. An interesting sort of filter that I try to help people understand is there's different methods to ask different questions or to answer different questions. And so if you are trying to gather objective, factual information about people's past behavior, the best tool for the job, if you have access to it, is historical data sets. You know, when you're working for a company like meetup.com, right, we've got 13 million customers a month. We've got terabytes worth of data. We have a lot of historical data sets to work off of. Entrepreneurs often don't have access to that. But if you just want to know the facts of what people have done and you have access to the data, that's the best tool for that job. If you are trying to get information about people's past behavior filtered through their recollection, surveys can be an excellent tool. Surveys are not great for very subjective information. They don't do a great job of telling you why things are happening, but they can tell you at a higher level of scale than just one-to-one conversations that people have done something. Have they taken an action? Have they paid for a product? Next, if you want to get insight into people's motivations, why they are doing something, what they are struggling with, what their behaviors were, and this is still going to be filtered through their psyche, then in-depth interviews are the best tool for the job because you can go deep, you could ask questions, you could really listen. If you want to get a detailed peek into current behavior, actually observing a customer go about their day, go about trying to solve a problem can be incredibly useful. And then lastly, if you want to predict new behaviors, this is where experiments come in. All the other tools don't do a great job of predicting new behaviors. Even tons and tons of data doesn't do that, because the data is everything that was in the past. It doesn't tell you what's going to happen in the future. Asking people what they might do in the future in interviews or in surveys doesn't give you believable information. Actually putting them through an experience and seeing what they do, now that's believable. And so the reason why I've mapped this thing out is that you're going to be asking questions as an entrepreneur about your business. You're trying to predict the future. You're trying to change the world in some way or the other. And so my recommendation is think about the question that you have and then decide what's the best tool for the job, because some tools are more believable than others. And that's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to balance as an entrepreneur, moving really fast, keeping your effort and cost as manageable and reasonable as possible, but getting as believable information as you can. And it's a real balance, right? The speed of your decision-making makes a huge difference as an entrepreneur, but also the quality of your decision-making. And so you're juggling speed and believability with all these different methods. There's, across these different methods, especially with interviews and experiments, there's a basic order of business. First thing you need to know is, who do you want to learn from? You don't want to be boiling the ocean. This is something that people struggle with, so I'm going to take a second to talk about it. But you need to identify your customer segments. You then have to identify what you want to learn. You can't learn everything. You've got to prioritize. Then there's actually recruiting your participants, designing what you're going to run those effective interviews, run those effective experiments. You have to then interpret, synthesize, and make decisions based on what you learn, and then rinse and repeat over and over again. So customer segments, I wanted to touch on this because I've just seen over the years people really struggle with this concept. Everyone wants to, especially in the consumer space, everyone wants everyone to use their product. But even in the business space, people tend to take way too broad an approach, especially in the early stage. And this adoption curve, which I first discovered in the mid-90s through Jeffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, is a really important concept to understand as an entrepreneur. That you don't just get to everybody all at once. That as a new business, your customers come in waves. And first you have innovators and early adopters. These are people that are willing to take risks on new products. They like trying new things. The best early adopters aren't ones that just like playing with new toys, because they'll kick the tires and then they'll leave. It's the ones that actually have such a problem that they're willing to take a risk on something unproven, which will be your new product. The bulk of the market, which is what everyone wants to focus on, is the majority. But here's the catch with the majority, is that they are waiting for early adopters to prove out the idea first. They're waiting for that evidence. You can't skip over the early adopters to get to the majority. It's just by definition that they are waiting for that social proof and that evidence. And so you've got to keep this in mind. When you're creating a new product, a new business, you almost want to think like an hourglass. Like at the beginning, you're not sure who your really narrow early adopters are. You need to take a slightly broad approach. You need to explore. But the best way to explore is to actually still think in narrow segments. You're just looking at a whole bunch of different narrow segments. And then you've got to pick where, the word I use is your beachhead. Like, what's the tip of the spear? Where are you going to focus to break out, to prove that within this customer base, you can solve their problem and get going. And then to other people, they then believe, oh, there's something real here. So you start broad with a whole bunch of narrow segments, but enough that you're starting broad and you're exploring, and then you narrow down and focus. And then once you've got success in a focused way, you could start to diversify and you could expand. And people really struggle with this because they're afraid that that's closing off too many markets. What about total addressable market, your TAM? I need to prove to venture capitalists that I've got a really big market. these concepts are not actually in opposition to each other, right? You're starting broad, you're going to get to, at the bottom of the funnel, you're going to get to a very big market, but you need to have a very focused entry point. So you've got to figure out where is the narrow part of the hourglass. And so if it's easier to think about this stuff, think about it in terms of waves, right? You're going to have a first wave coming in that's small. It's going to be a focus group, but the next wave is going to be bigger. The next wave is going to be bigger. You could start focused and still get to something very big. So I was recently, just a few days ago, I was giving a similar talk to a whole bunch of students at Northeastern University in Boston. Similar, you know, they're all entrepreneurs, and they're doing a business model challenge as well. And one of the students in the group was working on an idea. She wanted to help busy people find time to meditate. She wasn't trying to create a meditation app. She wanted to solve the problem of how do you find time to meditate. And I just thought I would take that simple example just to illustrate a few concepts. I said to her, what specific customer segments are you targeting first? And at first she was just thinking, well, everybody, right? Everyone would use my app. But then she thought about it and she said, okay, well, young people who are really busy, college students or people working on a new job. And this is a very common dynamic I see, and I bet the professors that are also on here also see, is people often jump to age bands, which is not necessarily the most effective way of categorizing people. So I said, why is age important here? You know, think about the need. Think about the other commonalities beyond just superficial things like age or gender. You know, are you targeting people that are expert at meditation, are beginners at meditation, somewhere in between? How about commonalities in terms of what's driving them to need to meditate, to want to meditate? Can you find things there? So her response was, well, I'm thinking about college students from a customer acquisition perspective. As a college student, it's easier for me to get to them first. I thought, okay, that's a reasonable response in terms of just a practical beachhead. I had been a little worried that she was just focusing on young people because as a young person, that's what she could understand. But I thought that was a reasonable response. And she said, I'm looking for people who are stressed about their studies. Okay, that's interesting. Now she's focused on a use case here, right? You could target people. Are you stressed about your studies? Are you looking to meditate? Okay, maybe I can help you. And then she said that she wanted to aim at people who were aspiring to meditate, but hadn't built a habit, weren't experts at this. Okay, so I thought it was a better, more narrow segment. And I said, I think you could even break that further down into some sub-segments. I actually recommend to my students that they almost take this to the point of feeling ridiculous, super, super, super narrow, so that it almost feels silly, and then back up a little bit, then come a little higher. But most people stop way too vague at the early stage. So then with this entrepreneur, I said, we've got to decide what we want to learn. Right? What are the risky things behind this idea, an app to help you find time to meditate? And we tossed out a few, right? We said, will people actually want to create time to meditate in their schedule enough that they will change their behavior, right? There's a lot of people who aspire to do this, but will they change their behavior? Will enough people care about doing this that I could build a meaningful business model? That's a very scary thing, I think, for this idea. There's this interesting question that she was trying to help busy people find time in their schedule to meditate. Could we actually do that? Could we tell what is effectively a good time in someone's schedule? How about next one? Like, will my customers actually take advantage of proposed times? Will they actually get the value? And then lastly, of the ones that we tossed out rather quickly, do their lives and their calendars change enough that our app can offer value on a recurring basis, i.e. you don't just use it for 2 seconds and then you're done, because that's probably not a great business. Another way of framing these instead of prompts is to think about the feasibility, the viability, the desirability of your product, and ask, like, what are the risks to those 3 things? But in any case, you want to think about the risky assumptions that you have, prioritize the ones that feel the biggest, and then choose for those top 1, 2, or maybe at most 3 things, where do you need to go investigate through interviews and experiments? And so I created a very short interview guide. And the key thing with these interview guides is you don't want to be asking too many questions going in. So in this one, I literally had really 2 questions plus others, and then a final one to remind myself at the end. So the first one was an opener. Well, what's a way to get someone talking that I can understand their context around this problem? So if I'm now recruiting college students who are busy and stressed about their studies, that are interested in meditation but are not experts at it. Okay, so I've got some of them. First thing I want to understand is, what's their experience? So let me get them talking. Have they meditated before? Do they do it on a regular basis? You could start with a simple prompt and then open it up. And the key thing is you are listening deeply and asking a lot of follow-on questions. And let me repeat that. You want to go into these interviews with just a few questions. And the key is listening deeply and asking lots of follow-ups. Why are you doing that? Tell me more about that. Let's go deeper into that story. It's the follow-on questions where you can really play detective that you find the best stuff. So I've got a very simple question you could see, number 1, and then there's a ton of follow-up questions that I'm expecting I'm probably going to ask. Why did this happen? Describe this process. Was this something that changed often? Why did you decide to do this particular thing? What was easy or hard? Did something cause you to stop? I don't know which questions I'm going to ask. That's going to be in the moment. But the key is I need to know that I need to ask lots of follow-on questions. There was a second question that I had teed up, which was, and I've highlighted here a very specific thing, getting someone to take me into a specific example. One of the mistakes that I see when people are doing interviews is they stay in very vague territory. You know, generally, how do you go about doing this? That's not useful. When you ask someone to tell you the average of their life experience, you are going to get a very mushy answer, and you are going to get an answer that's very filtered through what they think they should have done as opposed to what they actually did. So if there's 2 bits of advice that I could give you for running interviews, one is ask lots of follow-on questions. The other is don't speculate about the future and don't get vague about the past. Get into a specific example. Tell me about a specific time. In this case, I wanted to ask, what was the last time you tried to fit a meditation into your schedule, right? And there's a second part of this question that I said, because what if I had actually recruited someone who hadn't meditated recently, couldn't remember? I wanted a backup in my mind. And I said, okay, well, what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to help someone fit a 25 to 20-minute task into their day. So if they can't remember meditation, my backup here is to try to find another example where they needed to fit a 5 to 20-minute task into their day and then get them to take me through that. But the key thing is go to specifics. And then you could say, you could really drill down into what happened. What did you actually do? Why did you do that? What didn't you do? And because people are latching on to a specific thing, it tends to sharpen their memory. It also tends to make them more honest about what they actually did than if they're being really vague. And then the last thing that I try to remember to do is to always use every interview to get to more interview subjects. Do you know anyone else who's struggling with this problem, and can you introduce me? Now, a lot of people get sort of very tight around recruiting. There's a lot of different methods to recruit people. I've found that going to meetups or conferences can be very useful. You're not going to do the interviews at those events. What you're just going to do is meet people, ask them to give you their time, and then follow up with them very quickly afterwards. But networking can be incredibly effective as well. You know, I've talked to entrepreneurs who are trying to interview doctors, and doctors are insanely busy and they're hard to get to. And what I say to them is, I bet you know at least one doctor. And those doctors know other doctors, and those doctors know other doctors. So network the degrees of separation, right? Get to that first doctor, and then from there, get to other doctors and spread from there. So you could just network your way through people. You could cold call, you could do outreach, you could do social media polls. There's a lot of different techniques that allow you to recruit people. But then the next challenge is, how do you get someone to give you their time? If you're a student, sometimes you can play the student card. People like helping students, but I've also seen that not work at times because folks are busy and they're like, well, it's just a student project. I'm too busy to help that. The most effective way that I've seen people get someone's time is to connect what they're doing with something that that person cares about. You need to tell them why they should give you their time. And the best reason why is that you are trying to solve something that they care about. You are trying to solve a problem that they have. And when people, even though it's loose, even though it may never come back and solve it for them, but if they get a sense that someone is working on something that causes them pain, they are much more likely to give you help. So that's my probably biggest tip on the recruiting side. So in terms of doing these interviews, when you're doing these interviews, keep the conversation really natural. Don't get robotic with your questions. Be listening deeply, keep it conversational, and ask lots and lots of follow-on questions. Restrain yourself from leading the witness. Don't steer people in the direction that you want. You need to go into these things with a really open mind. You need to be prepared for someone to not have the problem you're hoping they have. And you really want to avoid speculation. This is not a good tool for guessing what someone might do in the future. People are terrible at guessing their future behavior. You cannot believe it, so don't go there at all, is my recommendation. And then you might note that of my little questionnaire, there was nothing about showing or asking about the product, because I don't find these kind of interviews that's something you really want to do. These interviews are great for exploring past behavior, trying to understand how people have tried to solve a problem. Have they tried to solve a problem? Why? What have they done? What were their motivations? It's different. This is not a sales conversation. If I want to have a sales experiment that I'm going to pitch 10 people and try to convert, 5 out of the 10, that's a very different thing. That's a useful experiment. That's a sales experiment. That is not doing a customer discovery interview. So you actually don't need to disclose how you're trying to solve it. You don't need to spend much time talking about your product for something like this. You need to be exploring the problem space, and you need to be exploring the mentality and mindset of your customers. Showing your product, running experiments on your product is a very different thing. So the last thing I'll just note, because people want to predict behaviors, they want to guess, will someone do something, is you want to complement these interviews with experiments. And so just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over sort of opening it up just so we can get to Q&A. And you want to remind yourself in designing experiments, remind yourself what your risky assumptions are, pick the biggest ones, and then think about what experiences can you create that test people's behavior. For this meditation app, I think there's a few easy ones that come to mind. You could do a concierge, where if you're trying to figure out, can I actually figure out good times and will people take advantage of it, go recruit 10 people and work with them, understand their schedule, interview them, and start proposing times and see if they actually do it. As part of that, you could also be asking them to journal their day. Did they actually meditate that day? Why not? But just by actually being your app, by manually acting as your app, you will discover so much about the friction points, the difficulties, the motivations, and actual behaviors. You could do a classic landing page test where you put something up with your value proposition and the idea, drive some traffic to it and try to test conversion rates. You could even play with dangling different business models in front of people next to your value proposition and see if that changes people's interest in the idea. If you're expecting that you need access to people's calendars to be able to understand what their best meditation times will be, you can figure out whether they would actually do that or whether their privacy concerns would get in the way. Then you got to figure out, and this comes back to the concierge, are calendars actually useful to you? So those are just a few ideas. There's lots of different ways to try out this idea, none of which require you to have built your product, to be in market with your product, to have spent tons of engineering time around your product. There are so many ways for you to poke at and better understand the risks and the problem space and the opportunity space of what you're working on, rather than just be totally focused on the product. So that sort of wraps up a few of sort of the introductory concepts that I wanted to get across, in terms of really hitting upon areas where I see people struggle. And at this point, I'd love to open it up to people's questions, and we can dive in or go wherever is useful.
Thank you, Giff. That was really good. And I think we have more than 50 people on the call here, which is also a great number. So let's see if we can get some questions. Obviously, you can use the chat, but I would actually prefer if you could open your camera and use the mic to ask your question, but either option is fine.
Yeah, and feel free, I've got participants open. Feel free to raise your hand, and I'll invite you to jump in and ask live. We got a shy group.
Oh, we have a lot of introverts, right? I hate to say that, but it's a cultural thing, is just getting that first question.
I understand it. What you can't do as an entrepreneur is allow your introversion to get in the way. Some people let their introversion get in the way of running these interviews. They want to hide behind surveys. They want to hide behind data. You can't allow yourself to do that. As an entrepreneur, it's actually a really important skill to cultivate, is networking, getting to people, convincing them to engage with you. If it's not something you're naturally good at, you either need a partner who is, or you have to break down your own mental barriers towards this and just do it. And it'll feel uncomfortable at the beginning. You'll feel bad at it at the beginning, but you're all really smart, and you get better and you get better. I always find with all of these techniques, when you're rusty or you're new to them, everyone's bad at them at the beginning. I'm bad at them when I haven't done them for a while. And then I'll go and I'll do an interview, and I'll walk away from the interview going, oh, I really flubbed that. But then you do the next one, and that one's better, and the next one, that one's better. And just like you try to iterate your product and your business to make it better, it's the same thing with these methods. Now, I thought I heard someone possibly jumping in. Sovan, jump in and join us.
Hi, thank you, Giff, for an insightful presentation. I think a lot of that, I have gone through your book, and I think a lot of what you have shared is something very common but hard to practice. Like, I think it's common knowledge but very hard to practice.
That's right.
My question is probably a little bit at a later stage. So we have a mobile learning app. We already launched it. Like before that, we also do a lot of like user center design, research or workshop, yep, and everything as well. But what we struggle right now is actually, we have tractions, but what we are struggling right now is actually to get a very good feedback from user. Like we have a very passionate like group of user who would say, oh, it's very good. We enjoy doing, we enjoy learning it a lot, for example, those kind of things. But we feel like we haven't got very good feedback from the user in terms of specifically how do we improve, how do we increase the retention rate, for example, how do we increase the learning time, for example, those kind of things. Yeah.
What does your app do, just so I have a little context?
It's basically supplementary lessons on math and science subject for high school students.
Got it. Yeah. High school students are a very difficult target audience. To get them to engage, just I'm a parent of a high school student. I know this very well. To get them to engage can be very tricky. I was just working with a startup that had this very problem, where they could see usage statistics, but when they reached out to customers to try to get engagement, to try to gather feedback, it was radio silence. They couldn't get people to engage. Now, honestly, I found that a little bit worrisome. because what I found is if you are delivering something of real value to the point that you've got that it's going to be a good business, there are people that care enough about what you're doing and how you fit into their lives that they're willing to give you time. And where you don't have that, that's a sign that you need to look honestly and ruthlessly at your business and say, are things good enough right now? Am I solving a hard enough problem? Am I effectively adding enough value? And as a startup, you're always, it's a journey. You can never deliver as much value as you want at the beginning. High school students, I would say, are a slight exception to that. But go ahead, please, Sivan.
I was just saying, we don't have issue with them not giving us time. Actually, they love to talk about what they are doing with the app. It's just that we feel like we keep getting the same feedback, like, oh, it's good, for example, those kind of things. Please give me more content, for example, but not really the type of feedback that result in students spending more time in our app, for example.
And you need them to spend more time because of your business model or something? Why do you need them to spend more time?
Because we believe that we need to develop a learning habit, right? And it takes like a few weeks, for example, to develop a good learning habit. So we are trying to find ways in order to make those habits stick.
Yep.
By spending more time and more regularly in the app. And when we ask, it's kind of like, oh, they are a little bit busy. Like if you love the app, but you are busy, it's kind of like hard to get them near that habit, make it stick.
Yeah. So you've got to figure out a way to engage with them and narrow down what you're talking about and what they're thinking about that ties to the problem you're trying to solve. It's very easy for people to say, oh, it's great, right? Most people just, it's an easy answer. Oh, it's great. I love it. It's awesome. People are conflict averse. Like they don't want to say, I don't like this. They don't want to say, oh, it could be improved. That sounds like calling someone's baby ugly again. Like you don't do that. You're nice and friendly. That's not useful to you as an entrepreneur. But so what you need to do is you need to get past that, which means you need to ask more probing questions. And you also need to narrow down where the conversation's going. So if you're talking about retention or you're talking about engagement, you should be able to, in your metrics and in your data, find people that haven't, right? So you could see for your data, okay, this student stopped using my app. Now I can go try to reach out to them and actually try to understand, why did you stop, right? A week ago, they might have said, oh, sure, it's great. But no, okay, we just spotted that they stopped. So we don't want to wait 6 months from now because they're not going to remember. But if we can try to get their attention right now and try to understand, why did you stop using the app? Was this a temporary thing? Like what's actually going on in your life? How were you trying to use the app? What was it doing? And did it become like? And there could be many different reasons why they stopped using the app. It might have to do with your app, might have to do with their lives. The same thing with retention. I always find it really, like a really important part of a product experience is the first user experience, is that entry point in. How does someone come in and how quickly can you get them to a moment of delight, right? A moment of delight around something that's really valuable to them. So like the shorter you can make that, that time period from trying your product to a light bulb going off in their head that goes, this was valuable, this was fun, this, the better. And when you're trying to figure out what do I measure, that time period and the frequency of that moment of delight's really important. Then you can.
Oh, sorry.
So the only thing I was going to say is that as you're doing your research, right, you could be asking questions around, one, you could be following the metrics, what people are doing in the product, but then you could be asking questions about what it was like to do that. You could also, and this is a little artificial, but you could also recruit some people who haven't used your application and actually observe them go into your application and see what they're doing and what's happening and have them be talking. This is a little more like a usability study where you're trying to see, is there something confusing about my application? That's very different from understanding value. Is my application valuable? A lot of people confuse these things, usable versus valuable. Those are two separate things. But you can narrow down your interview questions to that specific journey. And if you have actual metrics that say that they didn't do something, you could use that as a way to say, well, okay, I know you said you like it, but I know that you struggled to, or maybe that's the wrong word. I know that you weren't engaging with it very much. So help me understand what was going on. And don't let them off the hook too easily. Ask those probing questions.
I think there's a lot more students or listener having more questions. So I think.
Yes. Well, I hope that was useful, Sylvan. But yes, I would say narrow down your questions and push them. Don't let them just give you that shallow, superficial answer. Push to go deeper. Ask more follow-on questions. Challenge them. It's okay to challenge them in a friendly way, not an aggressive way, but in a friendly way. And pull it out of them, especially if you have cultural dynamics where people don't like to talk about bad things. You really have to make it okay. You've got to give them permission to say negative things. Welcome that in. And then maybe they'll open up. So Kana, do you want to pop on and ask your question?
Hello, so I'm Sukanya and I'm from Northeastern University. Thank you for the insightful presentation today. And I have a question. So 2 years ago, we don't know that the pandemic would happen. And now talking to human is nearly impossible. So in person is nearly impossible. So online interaction isn't as intimate as physical interaction. So what would be your strategy to navigate through this communication barrier?
Yeah, you know, it's you do the best you can with what you've got. That's what you do as an entrepreneur. I do agree that in-person interviews are the best. You can read someone's body language better. You can get into a rapport and a zone with them even easier. However, in-person interviews have problems unto themselves. They're harder to schedule. It tends to limit the geographic reach of who you get to interview. Like I live in the New York City area. And I constantly tell entrepreneurs, do not just interview people in New York City. New York City is a very weird, unique place, right? Most people do not live in something like New York City. If that's the only place you're getting customer research, you're blinding yourself. So do they have the money to go travel around the world, the country? No. So actually you can, actually one of the great things, there've been a lot of terrible things about this pandemic. One of the great things about this pandemic from an interviewing perspective is it's made everyone comfortable. Everyone has learned how to do video conferencing now. Everyone can use Zoom or Teams or Blue Jeans or Hangout. And so that has opened up who you can interview, and it's opened up how efficiently you can interview them as well. Video interviews, I think, are still the best, then audio, and then I would stop there. But if you can get someone on video so you could at least read their faces and engage and see each other, I think that's great. But don't let that stop you, right? It's still very possible to recruit people, to ask them probing and insightful questions, and to deeply understand how they felt about something, how they did something. There's nothing about COVID that has stopped that. We're simply engaging over video now. So as much as we've lost a few things in terms of not being in person, we've also gained some things in terms of efficiency, reach, spread, et cetera. So, you know, I think it's given as much as it's taken, but video interviews are a very effective tool that you should use and not shy away from. And all the same things about the methods apply, right? Going in prepared with just a few questions, listening deeply, being human, not leading the witness, not speculating with somebody, asking those follow-on questions, trying to get into specific stories, and all that stuff. It doesn't matter whether you're in person or over video, it's the same. Did I answer your question, or did you want to have a follow-up there?
I got it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Let's see. Next on my list, I think, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, is Um, Bunhong? No, I'm gonna totally
Yes.
butcher that.
No, definitely. It's hard. But yeah, it's Bun Huang. You got it correct. Yeah, but yeah, thank you so much. You know, I read your book back in 2018 when I did the business competition, the one that initiated by Steve, the business model competition here in Cambodia. It was very helpful. The template, the tool are quite helpful. Yeah, and I was just thinking, you know, that, you know, looking back in retrospect, it's still applicable today, even though you know, the pandemic happens and then we need to change strategy and stuff like that. But to what extent do you perhaps think that, you know, those tools and the mechanism and the template you've given are future proof? If you were to perhaps make changes to the book, what would be those changes, right? What would be the strategy or new strategy that you would recommend?
Well, you know, in some ways you've already heard them in my talk today. I am going to be doing a second edition of Talking to Humans this year. Testing with Humans, I think, is pretty, it doesn't need to be updated, but Talking to Humans, I think, does. What I've learned in watching people struggle with this, I think the fundamentals of this technique are totally unchanged and will continue to be unchanged, because what we're talking about is we're dealing with humans, right? We're dealing with human beings. The human condition, our psychology, technology changes around us, people don't change, right? These methods are very difficult to do. They seem easy. They seem really easy, but they're really hard to do well, both experiments and interviews. What I've learned in watching people is the common mistakes I see is people, and I've pushed on this in the little talk, is they boil the ocean and they don't get specific around who their customers really are. They go in like robots and they try to bang through a question list and they never ask follow-on questions, and they walk away and go, I didn't learn anything. I got superficial answers. They just told me really, you know, superficial things. It's like, yeah, it's because you didn't dig. You didn't push. You didn't ask those follow-on questions. You didn't ask why and then why. You didn't, like, you've got to follow your antenna, really chase these things down. And then watching people ask these vague questions of, okay, like, how do you study most of the time? Right? Like that's an average. Tell me about your average behavior. It does not give you real insights, as opposed to, let's walk through the last time you did something. Let's get really specific here. Oh, you didn't do this thing? Why? Oh, because no way. Oh, right.
Yeah.
This, when I was doing an interview for this Northeastern Husky Challenge thing a few days ago, I actually did a live interview of a college student during this, and the student admitted, like, seeing my calendar is going to be useless because I've got all these things that I have to do during my day that aren't on my calendar. I've got to call my parents. I've got to go to the dry cleaners. I got to do that. And it's like, if the entrepreneur hadn't heard that and was going and thinking about their solution, thinking about an app, thinking, you know, totally caught up into, okay, I'm going to see these windows and boxes and it's going to be great. And they hadn't actually done these interviews to explore what is a huge, huge gaping problem for their ability to successfully create an app when, you know, when it's impossible from a technology perspective to get to the blockers to their schedule. They would spend all this money making something and then run straight into a brick wall. And so it's these techniques are all about spotting the brick walls early. So then you could decide, do I need to go through it? Do I need to go under it? Do I need to go around it? Do I need to change direction entirely?
I think that's interesting, because I think for us, for some of us, time is like, you know, you have all the time to do interviews and talking to people, but some certain, you know, group of individual, time might be a luxurious thing that you could not spare. For example, it might be, for example, I come from consulting, management consulting. So we run on deadlines and, you know, project timeline and stuff like that. So we usually think that we don't have time to, like, you know, go deep down, right? So then what would be, and I think this would be different from, you know, those who run startup, because maybe they don't, be under so much time constraint, right?
Well, look, all of these methods that we talk about, lean startup, taking an agile or continuous approach, they are designed for situations where there is uncertainty. If you are doing something where there's no uncertainty, where the rules are clearly defined, and some engineering things in the physical world can be like this. The laws of physics. We're going to be doing a gradation of a road. It's like we know how many cars drive over that. Like there's little uncertainty there. We can run that like a very solid project. But when you have conditions of uncertainty, you have to take a totally different approach. I mean, think of it's a very simple thing. If you run really fast in the wrong direction, you are further from your goal. And this is something that a lot of people are struggling with, as a lot of companies are struggling to adjust, because the old way of working was it's about efficiency.
Right.
The new way of working, because we've realized that the world moves so fast, it's so competitive, it's so uncertain, is you need agility. But what agility really means is that you're learning, you're turning that learning into decisions, and then you're executing on those decisions really quickly. As an entrepreneur, everything's uncertain. You are in the most uncertain possibility. But even for very large companies and very established companies, they're dealing with a lot more uncertainty than they used to. And so a lot of companies say, oh, we don't have time for research, or we don't have experiments. And then they wonder why all their projects fail, right? We keep on releasing this stuff and no one's using it. Well, yeah, because you're trying to run fast, but you're not thinking. You're not asking the right questions.
Yeah,
So yeah,
sense.
just something to keep in mind.
Thank you so much.
You got it. Lena, what's your question?
Hello, Professor. Sorry. Okay. Hello, sir. So I'm from NUM International College, and I'm currently creating an app that solves personal problem, which is dating. It's a dating app. And so one thing for sure is that I'm currently collecting a primary research via survey, online survey. However, I find it very ineffective because people seem very insincere and not quite honest with their answer.
Yep.
So do you think it would be a great idea for me to reach out to people about their personal problem?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, look, I use surveys very rarely, and I tend to only use them. And I didn't begin this way. I just learned that I just didn't trust them. I will use them with very specific factual behavior. So, many years ago, I was working with a big media company in New York, and we were doing some stuff around dieting, weight loss, and trying to come up with a new product and business model for them around that. And so we did do a survey, and it was, have you ever been on a diet? Did you spend money on your diet? How long did you last on your diet? These were things that people could remember, answer. They're fairly factual. It's objective information. But it would be a useless tool to try to go deep into why someone wanted to go on a diet. For that, you need to get into a conversation. You need to make, especially when it comes to sensitive things, you need to make them comfortable. You need to ask a question sort of brings people into the conversation, not something that's going to make them defensive, make them nervous, make them upset. This is something that's particularly important if you're researching areas that are highly sensitive, such as an eating disorder, right? Very easy to trigger someone if you ask a question in the wrong way. You need to ease someone into that conversation and pull them in. But, around dating, if you want to understand people's experiences, what they've done, you can do a survey that says, have you ever tried using other dating apps? How long did you stick with it? Did you meet someone? Rank the reason why you signed up for it or didn't sign up. And that can be, that could be okay. It'll give you a higher number of inputs, but the real insights are going to come from talking to people. listening to people, and probing in the areas. Like if you think you have a particular new insight to that something has changed, either people's behavior has changed or that you have a new insight that means that you think that a new dating app could work, and you want to sort of zoom in your conversations in that area, the insights are going to come from the interviews. Then if you want to see if people will actually do it, create an experiment. Create an experiment where you actually, manually run people through a simulation of your product or what your product might be, and see, what are the problems, what works. It's really effective to actually pair these things together. You put people through an experiment, an experience, you watch what they do, you measure what they do, but then you talk to them about why did they do what they do? Because that's always the thing about metrics. Metrics tell us what people did, but it doesn't tell us why. The numbers never tell us why. We have to talk to people to get there. So I think these methods completely apply to what you're doing. Frankly, I've never seen anything where they don't apply. I've worked with entrepreneurs with a lot of different ideas. Ainsley.
Hi, I'm Angeli, and I'm from the Liger Leadership Academy. And thank you for the very helpful presentation. And I received a lot of great advice. So my question is relating to what we discussed just earlier about whether doing an experiment or survey is good. So I wanted to have your feedback on our plan right now, because we're trying to predict our customers' future behavior, which is, are they interested in our service and will they use it or not? So, and we want to do it in a big scale to get a lot of numbers in. So we're designing a survey where we will pair it with a prototype of our website where our customers can go in and interact with the website just to really experience what the service is like. And then we will ask them about their user experience and then see their interest. So do you think that will be an effective way to validate our market? What are some of your feedbacks on that?
Well, it depends on where you are with the product and your stage. I actually do push people in the earlier parts of their startup not to worry about large numbers. Just get some data coming in. Now, you could have too few numbers. If you've gone and you've spoken to 3 people, that's not enough, right? You're going to be way too swayed by a few data points. If you've gone and talked to 20 people and some patterns are starting to merge, that's a signal you could work with. You could start making decisions based on that, right? You don't have to worry about thousands. Remember, you're balancing effort, time, speed, and believability. And as an entrepreneur, you got to just make the most with the limited stuff that you've got, right? And so don't worry. And some people who come from the hard sciences really struggle with this because they're used to thinking about statistical significance. Statistical significance is irrelevant here. You need to be wary and paranoid about too few data points, but you can't afford statistical significance. You have too many decisions to make in too quick a time. So just try to get as informed as you can to get 70% accurate and go, is what I would say. Jeff Bezos has a sort of a classic way of thinking. I think he calls it type 1 and type 2 decisions. Some people call them one-way doors and two-way doors. For decisions that are easily reversible, that aren't that important, you can make them very fast, because if you get it wrong, you could always reverse it. For decisions that feel really big and important, spend a little more time trying to gather data and insight into them. So, it also matters the kind of decision you're making. But I also see too many entrepreneurs their experiments are their product. And look, the reality is that that's where truth really lies, right? Some people who've read Talking to Humans and Testing with Humans have seen this thing in the book called the truth curve, which is just a simple concept that, believability changes depending on the method you use, which is I talked about today. Like, real truth is your product is live in the market. People are buying it or they're not. They're using it or they're not. They're, getting value or they're not. But you don't want to wait until that point as an entrepreneur. And way too many people, because entrepreneurs tend to be product people like me, that's where their comfort zone is, put all their energy into the product. And the product doesn't need to work. The product's got to be effective. But they focus on building out the product because they say that's going to be my experiment. When they actually could simulate the product, they could create alternative experiments without having to put in that time, that engineering resource, the cost to get some useful data coming in. It's not going to be as true and as believable as the actual product, but it still informs you. So when I first tried doing this, I was trying out these methods in a startup I was doing back in 2009, 2010, I think. And I'd come off of a number of startups already to that point, and some had done well, but I had just shut one down. And I was really hurting from that failure, and I wanted to do it a better way. And so I was like, I buy into doing research and experiments. My first experiments were like 6 months long. They were way too product oriented. And then I finally got that down to like 3 months, then 3 weeks, and then 3 days. You really can push these things down if you get creative about it. A useful thing that I ask myself, just a little shorthand for everybody: how can I learn just as much with half the time and half the effort? So if you're thinking about your experiment, ask yourself that question. How can I learn just as much with half the time and half the effort? And I almost guarantee if you ask that question legitimately and you apply your very creative brain to that, you will come up with a way to do it. And I also bet that if you ask that question again, you could probably cut in half again. And sometimes you could then cut in half again, right? And each time you're cutting it in half, yes, the believability is shrinking a little bit. But remember, it's about speed of informed decision-making. How do you get data flowing into your brain? So you're exposing these risks, so you're informing yourself so that you're improving as you go. So yes, you could run the survey, but I would absolutely complement the survey with interviews. But it just sounded like, from an experiment perspective, you were thinking very product oriented, and I would challenge you to really try to get outside of product. Like, when you think product, you tighten up. You're thinking the quality needs to be really high, my usability needs to be good, I need to have test coverage of my software code, like all this stuff that's very professional. When you think, I just need to learn, I just need to run an experiment, it liberates you from all this stuff we get taught as to how to do a product that's proper, and allows you to move a lot faster. You act more like a hacker. You create things that are more throwaway. And I don't mean that you're creating an awful experience for the person that's going through the experiment, but it does a lot. It liberates you to move a lot faster. So not knowing more, that's just my first reaction.
Thank you.
We're at the top of the hour, Stephen, so I'll turn this over to you as to whether you wanted to keep on going or whether we should wrap here.
Sure. Do you have a few more minutes, or do you have a tight schedule? I'll leave that to you if you have a tight.
I probably could take one or two. I got 5 more minutes, so I could probably take 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, let's have one more question. So I guess we'll go with the order. So I think that would be Surya who has the next question.
Thank you, Mr. Giff, for the insightful presentation earlier. So to make it short, my team is working on a social venture project, which we're focusing on the blood donation application. So as for a social venture, so how do we identify our customer or user? Mostly for social venture, we do it to impact the society, but in the business model concept, do we have to scope it into a small scale first, and then we expand it?
Yes, I would say, I don't think there's a lot of difference between what you're dealing with and frankly, what a for-profit business is dealing with. It's as if to say, is it radically different if you're trying to create an advertising business versus a subscription business? No, your business model is different, but you still have these big questions. Will people do what I expect them to do? Right? Will we be able to create value for ourselves and for other people? you may be going for a nonprofit orientation, but you're still basically trying to get people to engage with what you're trying to do. You're hoping that they do so, and you're hoping to provide some benefit to the world. You know, this one company might be trying to make an accountant's life easier so the numbers are more accurate. You might be trying to, you know, solve a societal ill, but you're still trying to change behavior. You're still trying to create value. So the same things apply here. You're trying to deeply understand your problem space and your possibility space. You're trying to deeply understand people's behavior, and you're trying to guess, predict, and then not take advantage, but change people's behavior in some way to make something better happen in the world. So the same exact methods apply. You just need to think about them in your context. What questions, who are going to be your first engagers? Who are the people that you both are solving this, or, you know, trying to deliver your benefit to originally? Who are going to be, if you're trying to raise money and gather donors, who are going to be your first customers, right? Your first donors. There may be an adoption curve. Most likely there's going to be an adoption curve there. You need to understand what is just like companies have to think about the shape of their revenue streams. Take a game company, a social game, a mobile game company, right? They've got a lot of free users, and they have what they call whales, which is a very small number of their customers that pay them a lot of money. Other companies have lots of people paying them the same amount. Like, they have a curve of how money comes in the door. You need to understand that for a nonprofit perspective. What are your donors going to look like? Are you counting on a few very large donors and then a long tail? Is it a power curve? Is it smoother? Like that, you're going to learn through experiments, interviews, and probably getting into a spreadsheet and exposing your risks that way. But all the same things that you need to do for a for-profit business, by exposing your assumptions, exposing your risks, apply here, so that you can increase the odds that you're actually going to be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Yeah, so your context is slightly different, but the tools actually are the same. So just think about them in your context.
So thank you, Giff. This has been a great session. I'm amazed by how many questions we've had. Usually we struggle, to be honest. You know, when you messaged me earlier and said, make sure that people come armed with questions, I was worried, but this has been really, I think the most questions we've had on any of our startup sessions. So this is really, really positive. And again, very much appreciate, giving up your time to spend that for us here in the evening, morning, your time. And then again, thanks a lot, and have a great day. And hopefully, if you ever come to Cambodia, if you ever want to come to see Angkor Wat or whatever, please stay in touch, and we'd be happy to show you around.
One day I would love to, always aspire to. I wish, look, these techniques are hard. Being an entrepreneur is hard. I wish you all the very best of luck. It takes grit, it takes persistence. You have to will things into existence, but you have to ask hard questions along the way and be really honest with yourself and your ideas. So I wish, and it's not an easy thing to do. So I wish you all the best. And thanks for letting me join you this morning.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.